Joe Burke, Senior Manager for Meat and Livestock at Burke, joins us now. Joe, thanks for coming in to us.
No problem, Claire.
Joe, I'm going to get onto the situation in Cherbourg in a couple of moments, but first, can you just outline the stage we're at with calf exports this year?
So yeah, we have obviously got to the middle of March, Claire. Typically the peak of exports take place during the month of March and April, which obviously coincides with the peak availability of dairy bred calves. So for the year to date, total live exports are up by about a third. So to the beginning of March, we've exported 40,000 head of cattle altogether, and 30,000 of them approximately have been calves. So similarly, calf exports would also be up by approximately a third. And the big markets to date have been the Netherlands. There have been 15,000 calves exported to date to the Netherlands, and that's an increase of 50%. Spain has taken 12,000 Irish calves, and that's an increase of 20% on last year's levels. And the other markets then after that being the likes of Italy, France, Belgium, and even Poland has taken some Irish calves as well. So, it really facing into over the coming, month or so, a very busy period for live exports. Obviously in the calf category, it represents a very important outlet and an alternative source of competition for these animals, because really we're looking at much, much higher numbers maybe than would have been the case going back 4 or 5 years ago, since the significant dairy expansion.
And Joe, recently the Minister announced that there is additional space in Cherbourg for 400 more calves. A lot of exporters are not happy with that. Farm organisations are not happy with that. Is 400 enough?
So the reason that the announcement for an additional 400 spaces, Claire, have become available is that one of the lairage operators in Cherbourg, near where the Irish trucks arrive into from the ferries, he made an investment in the business in order to extend his lairage sheds, and those additional spaces have now come on stream. So that brings the total capacity closer to 4,500 calves, Irish calves per day, in those sheds, which is a nice improvement. It's a slight increase there. It obviously means that that's an additional lorry load of calves. Approximately 300 calves are delivered on each truck. But exporters, as you pointed to there, would still prefer some additional capacity there, given the numbers of calves which they are being offered currently. So there are 3 sailings a week. So that brings our weekly capacity closer to and even exceed 13,000, as opposed to just around 12,000 where they would have been previously.
But is the 400 enough then? Do we need more?
Well, there would be demand at this time during this peak availability period for higher numbers than that, Claire. Certainly exporters would argue that they would be able to send out bigger numbers than what they are currently doing under their current capacity. Obviously, the weather conditions have been an issue recently as well too, where in the last few weeks we have seen sailings being cancelled, or livestock trucks basically not being permitted to board the ferries just because of the weather conditions and the rough sea conditions. So that just meant that there was backlogs in exporters' own premises before they were able to get them out and export them.
Joe, you've been out there assessing the situation in Cherbourg. How significant is the backlog of Irish calves in Ireland now at the moment? And is there need for Abbeville to open up for lairage space?
So yeah, that's right, Claire. We visited, that is Burke, along with my market colleagues in our Paris office, travelled down to Cherbourg and met with lairage operators there in order to just assess the situation, I suppose, and the bottleneck as it is currently, the available space there, and to look at potential solutions. Obviously, some of those are longer term, but Irish exporters, they're always going to try and get the maximum potential that they can, and less restrictions in terms of availability of spaces out there. And they have a lot of different factors to contend with including obviously spaces on board the vessels, so sailing both out of Rosslare and now Dublin as well too, trucks as well too. It's not just that they can ring up a transport company and get export trucks at very short availability. It all has to be coordinated. And now as well too, spaces in the lairage in Cherbourg. So there's a lot of different factors there for them to contend with. And
Abbeville, does Abbeville need to be opened?
So basically Regulation 1 of 2005 means that under the export conditions, once the animals arrive in their port of destination, if you like, so once the calves arrive, in this case, all of our calves arrive into the port of Cherbourg, under this EU regulation, they have to be lairaged in the immediate vicinity of that port. Now, while there is some flexibility and obviously practical conditions have to prevail, but Abbeville is about almost 300 kilometers away from Cherbourg, so it's a journey of up to 4 hours. It just goes a bit too far outside of that guideline or that EU regulation.
So that's on animal welfare grounds, as Minister Creed has been highlighting that's going to be an issue there. Purcell Brothers also recently, we were talking to them and they said that there was a boat, possibly a walk-on, walk-off boat available there for calf exporters to maybe alleviate some of the pressure that's building up. Yet it doesn't seem to be a runner.
Claire, I suppose that comes down to the exporters' current preference themselves for operating on just a roll-on, roll-off system. So they load the calves themselves on board the trucks from their own export premises. And from there, then they travel on board the roll-on, roll-off or the ferry option to Cherbourg. And at least then they're on board the same truck all the way from the exporter's unit to the customer in the Netherlands or in Spain. Talking to some of them, they feel that it would be a bit more difficult logistically to manage the loading of the calves onto a walk-on, walk-off vessel and then unloading them and loading them onto a different truck, or potentially the truck might travel empty and then pick up the calves on the other side. So there are a few logistical challenges, and obviously the management of the calves is another factor as well too, that would have to be thought of and have to be looked after. It is a possible solution, but currently the exporters, their preference would be to continue, I suppose, exporting in the way that they have been doing. And
I know there's lots of talk at the moment about setting up a possible exporter body representing all the exporters, and maybe that could push it through. Just the WB Yates that has come on stream this week, is that going to alleviate the pressure, or is there any room there for additional capacity on that boat? So
Irish Ferries have put as you say, the WB Yates, a large vessel. It's going to be also travelling from Dublin into the same port, into Cherbourg. Unfortunately, it doesn't solve any of the capacity issues, Claire, because it's actually sailing on the same transport days, on a Tuesday, a Thursday and a Saturday. So for the short term, it isn't a solution in terms of getting out additional numbers of calves this spring.
Joe, finally, last question. We're looking at dairy expansion still at the moment. The herd is growing. This is a recurring issue for us with calves coming on stream. And the beef sector as well aren't as inclined to maybe bring in calves from the dairy herd to rear them as well for beef. Long term, what are the solutions for us on this Cherbourg issue? Obviously, more facilities are needed over there in Cherbourg. Who's going to pay for them? So yeah, you have 2 lairages in Cherbourg, Claire. Both of them are privately owned businesses, and they have already invested themselves to varying degrees in order to keep their facilities up to a very high standard. They have indicated and in discussions that they would be willing to look at further expansion. But historically in the past, even within the last decade, there would have been funding available or some subsidization available from European programs. So their preference would be to avail of any potential funding that might be available. Obviously, it would be linked to having high quality facilities and continuing to look after the welfare of the animals. But currently there are no such support
funding mechanisms available. So that is something that obviously that they're pushing for. But it would be great if some additional capacity could be made available for, certainly if it's not going to happen this year, hopefully for next spring, that all of this could be ready and in motion.
Joe, we're out of time. Thanks very much for coming in to us.
Thanks, Claire. No problem.